In what has to be one of the most expected but still highly consequential lawsuits, the record industry is suing Suno and Udio. Welcome back to the AI Daily Brief. Of all the industries, specifically the content or entertainment industries, the one that was always likely to fight back the hardest against generative AI, in my estimation at least, was the music industry. The music industry has a really interesting relationship with new technologies, where in many ways they looked like they were going to be the first to be disrupted back in 1999 with the arrival of Napster. However, what happened is that the muscle they built fighting new technologies and retaining copyright power has actually made them one of the most formidable opponents of new technologies. That is, of course, until they can get their piece of it. And so it was no surprise at all that the Recording Industry Association of America, as well as a set of labels including Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and Warner Records, are suing the two best-known music generator startups, Suno and Udio. The RIAA is seeking damages of up to $150,000 per copyright work, making this case have potentially enormous financial consequences. Said the RIAA chief legal officer in a press release, "These are straightforward cases of copyright infringement involving unlicensed copying of sound recordings on a massive scale. Suno and Udio are attempting to hide the full scope of their infringement rather than putting their services on a sound and lawful footing." Their argument is basically that if these companies had worked to avoid training their models on copyright works, then they, quote, would not have been able to reproduce the convincing imitations of such a vast range of human musical expression. Suno said that the platform is designed to, quote, generate completely new outputs, not to memorize and regurgitate pre-existing content. The CEO of Suno pointed out that the company doesn't allow user prompts based on specific artists. In a statement they wrote, "We would have been happy to explain this to the corporate record labels that filed this lawsuit, and in fact, we tried to do so. But instead of entertaining a good faith discussion, they've reverted to their old lawyer-led playbook. Suno is built for new music, new uses, and new musicians. We prize originality." Reinforcing the idea that this isn't particularly unexpected, The Verge writes, "Suno executives and investors acknowledge the possibility of being sued in a Rolling Stone profile on the company this March. For some, it's simply the cost of doing business." Antonio Rodriguez, an early investor in Suno, told the magazine, quote, "Honestly, if we had deals with labels when this company got started, I probably wouldn't have invested in it. I think that they needed to make this product without the constraints." Another big point in the communications, at least from the RIAA and the record labels, is that this is not an indictment of AI a priori. Said RIAA chairman and CEO Mitch Glazier, "The music community has embraced AI, and we are already partnering and collaborating with responsible developers to build sustainable AI tools centered on human creativity that put artists and songwriters in charge. But we can only succeed if developers are willing to work together with us. Unlicensed services like Suno and Udio that claim it's fair to copy an artist's life work and exploit it for their own profit without consent or pay set back the promise of genuinely innovative AI for us all." The crux of the argument for the labels is that training on copyrighted materials represents a breach of copyright. From the complaint, building and operating these services requires at the outset copying and ingesting massive amounts of data to train a software model to generate outputs. For these services, this process involved copying decades worth of the world's most popular sound recordings and then ingesting those copies to generate outputs that imitate the qualities of genuine human sound recording. So what has been the reaction? Many folks have pointed to some of the labels' evidence where they were able to reproduce what they consider to be very close facsimiles to existing well-known songs. For example, this generation of All I Want for Christmas Is You. A lot of artists' rights advocates find themselves in the uncomfortable position of being aligned with the labels. Rob Abelo writes, "Breaking, all three major labels are suing AI music generators Suno and Udio. The RIAA is coordinating the lawsuits on behalf of Sony, Warner, and UMG. Hammer dropped." Rob continues, "It's been clear to anyone with ears that Suno and Udio have trained on copyrighted material for their AI models, with zero transparency, plan to compensate, or seek licenses." Rob also goes on to say there are ways to do this and play by the rules. 1. Train only on licensed catalog. 2. Compensate artists and songwriters. 3. Full transparency. It just takes a little longer and requires actually caring about creatives. Rob continues, "Just last week, Gen AI dropped their fully licensed and transparent Gen AI model, and voice cloning companies like VoiceSwap and SoundLabs are doing the same. Music isn't anti-AI, it's anti-theft." Who will win, Rob concludes? It all comes down to fair use. Either way, we'll finally have an answer on the legality of generative AI music training in the US. And this is really the question, and why, to be honest, even though I'm reporting it, so much of the conversation we have in the public isn't particularly relevant. Ultimately, the big question before the courts right now is whether training of AI models represents copyright infringement or whether it's covered by fair use. That's it. That's the whole ballgame. All of these lawsuits, every single one you've seen by any copyright holder against any AI firm, are all pushing to get that question ultimately in front of the Supreme Court, because that's what it's going to take. If you go hang around law circles, or less edifying but perhaps more entertainingly, the various circles of Twitter/X that are talking about this, you will get lots of different takes on the fair use question. Krista Gable writes, as an advocate for AI music, I believe that the transformative nature of AI in music creation can and should be supported under the fair use doctrine. She goes on the 4 factors of fair use. 1, purpose and character of the use. AI music training is fundamentally transformative. While it learns from existing music, it doesn't simply copy or replicate it. Instead, it analyzes patterns, styles, and structures to generate entirely new compositions. 2, nature of the copyright work. While music is a highly creative form of expression which generally receives strong protection, the use of music for training AI involves using it in a different context. The purpose here is not to exploit the original work, but to enable the AI to learn and create something novel. 3, amount and sustainability. AI training typically involves analyzing large datasets to learn effectively. However, the use is not focusing on taking substantial portions of any one work, but rather on understanding broad patterns across many works. One of the most critical factors is whether the AI's use of music harms the market for the original works. AI-generated music does not serve as a market substitute for the original compositions. Instead, it opens avenues for creativity, potentially expanding the market by creating new opportunities and genres. I think personally that there is going to be a lot of time spent on this 4th factor. Yes, the labels are able to recreate some decent facsimiles for their own songs, but is that highly specific use the way that others are actually using these tools? Or are they, as Krista argues, doing something completely new and different? Making this even more complicated is the fact that music only has a relatively limited number of inputs. There are only so many notes. It's one of the reasons that lawsuits about whether a song is too close to another song get so hairy and so subjective. There is also one other slightly cynical take that you'll see around this conversation, which is that ultimately this is just leverage for the labels to control the next generation of music production as well. Carrie Muzzy writes, are we placing bets that the labels just want part ownership, Suno and Udio to go public, labels sell their shares and make billions? I don't think the labels are suing to stop it. I think labels are suing to get in on the action. Agree or disagree with the cynicism of that take, I certainly think that the only likely outcome in the long run is label integration with the new technology in the same way that happened with streaming, or at least in some approximate way. Ultimately, there are 2 battles going on here. One is a legal battle and one is a public opinion battle. As Bilawal Sidhu points out, what is ethical is not always legal, and what is legal is not always ethical. He points out, in all of this, it's really the indie artist who is royally screwed. The creators who aren't big enough to drive a collective bargaining effort with tech companies and get paid off for their content libraries. Where does this leave us, he writes? We can be very sure that as long as courts don't intervene, the practice on training on, quote, publicly available data will continue. Robots.txt be damned, copyright be damned. Proponents of this practice will say we all learn from each other and that everything is a remix. But machines are different from humans. A human can't watch all of YouTube and can't listen to every song on Spotify, read all the text on the internet. But a machine can. And that makes it feel fundamentally different from a human learning from copyrighted material to produce transformative work. To the extent that you were looking for a positive in all this, there actually is a fairly big middle space. Represented here by Matt Wolf, who writes, copyright laws need to be rethought and revamped. They were primarily designed for a pre-digital world. I don't have the answers, but I believe there is a middle ground where artists are compensated, companies can train and innovate, and creators don't need to worry about the ethics behind the tools they decide to use. My friend James, the CEO of Creator Mode Studios, who deals at the intersection of music and tech, writes, the Suno and Udio lawsuits highlight the growing pains of integrating AI into the music industry. Rather than viewing AI as a threat, we should see it as a tool that can revolutionize music creation. By establishing clear guidelines and ethical standards, we can ensure that AI benefits both innovators and traditional artists alike. The real issue here isn't just about copyright infringement, it's about ensuring that creators are at the forefront of technological change. We need a creator-first revolution where artists, producers, and writers have a say in how their work is used and benefit directly from the advancements in AI. And in fact, there is lots of agreement, at least broadly speaking, on that point. The question, of course, is how to make that real. For now, though, that is going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief. Until next time, peace.